Thank you for listening to the Chase Merrill podcast.
Why is it that people need to focus more on intentional breathing? Because I've been breathing since I came out of the womb. What should I be doing differently, or what could be improved upon?
Well, I think that's obviously like it's contextual to me, like my current state, whether that's physical, mental, emotional, the context of what I'm actually doing. Am I doing physical exercise? What type of physical exercise am I doing? Am I just at rest? Am I walking to the bus? Like, what's the context of how I'm supposed to be breathing is a starting point, and then getting an awareness of like, well, how am I actually breathing right now, and how do I cope? How does my breathing cope when I'm being challenged in some way, be that physical, mental, or emotional? So that I start to get a bit of a better idea of like, what are some of my let's say compensatory sort of breathing patterns, and how that affects not just the breathing dynamics, but how that will affect the nervous system, how that affect how the body is moving, because your pelvis connected to the rib cage, your shoulder blade sits in the back of the rib cage. It's going to affect how the body moves. It's going to be translated through the kinetic chain. If I'm trying to be more efficient with my movement, we've also got the element of like, what's the diaphragm and the associated stabilization around that midline I'm able to create with my breathing dynamics. If I'm doing it effectively, like, how's that going to translate into better force transfer or force production or just efficiency of movement? That's a whole piece. There's so much to breathing other than just, am I getting oxygen in okay or not? You know, and the typical type of question when someone, I had a really good example with a professional rugby player this week where he was like up front, like, I'm pretty skeptical, mate. So you got a hard job in convincing me I need to do, like, how can breathing help me when I'm blown out of my arse and I can't catch my breath on the rugby field? Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, for starters, but essentially because, you know, as you said, you've been breathing ever since you came out of the womb, and you're going to carry on breathing until you take your last breath, and you will be getting oxygen in, and you will be getting rid of CO2, and your body is alive, like it's coping. But is it coping, or do you want to just cope, or do you want to optimize, or do you want to be efficient with it? Do you want to flourish rather than just cope? And like, life is difficult enough of all the things that we've got to deal with, physical, mental, emotional, environmental, all those things that we've got to deal and cope with. Below all of that, that's got to happen all the time, is you've got to be breathing, otherwise you're going to die. And if I'm doing that in a compensatory way, this foundational, fundamental thing that I have to do in order to stay alive, if I'm doing that in a compensatory way, like, it's just more effort, it's more energy, it's more stress, if you want to call it that, on the system as just a baseline. Like, that's whereas with this example that I was saying about with the rugby player, a sort of obvious starting point with that conversation when someone's skeptical, because it's like, well, yeah, you are breathing and you're doing fine, and you're playing, you know, top level rugby, like, good on you. But, you know, do you look at your nutrition to try and eke a little bit more out of that? Like, what recovery strategy, like, what things are you doing to try and improve yourself? From a breathing perspective, in his scenario, again, like, how is it going to help me, like, when I'm blown out my arse right there on the field? And, you know, one simple thing I said initially was like, well, we've seen from the data in when we're studying athletes that depending on the way you are ventilating, you can do it more efficiently or less efficiently. When we do it more efficiently, there's a really important ratio that we can calculate when you're taking someone through something like a VO2 max, where we can see they can extract, someone's more efficient at breathing, and more elite athletes are like this, particularly elite runners, can extract more oxygen per breath. And he was like, well, come again? So, like, I can get more oxygen out of each. It's like, you can do that. You can improve that efficiency, that ratio. That has then knock-on effects downstream of like, oh, well, if I'm getting more oxygen per breath, it makes sense that then I don't need to breathe as hard, or I don't need to breathe as fast, and therefore I feel a little bit more in control, and I feel a little bit more in control physically, but also in control mentally, which really helps people in sporting context, but also in life. Like, can I be in a better mental space to deal with all the other things that are going on? And your breathing will influence your nervous system and influence the way that you're thinking and feeling.
Just give me one quick moment, then we'll be right back to the episode. If you are enjoying the show, go ahead and give me a follow or subscribe wherever you are listening. It helps way more than you'd think. And if you wouldn't mind leaving a rating or a review, that helps new people find the show as well. And if you have any questions or comments or recommendations for guests, go ahead and reach out to me at Chase C. Merrill on Instagram or leave a comment right here on Spotify. Thank you so much for being here. Now let's get back to the episode. You mentioned...
Yeah, sorry, that was just a massive rant.
No.
Basically.
No, it was great. It was a loaded question that I set you up with. You mentioned that people, whether they wanted to be coping or thriving in breath, how would an individual know if they were coping or thriving?
Not coping or thriving in breath, more coping or thriving in life.
Okay.
And the chances are, if you're thriving with like beautiful, amazing breathing, depending on external factors, you're probably like able to deal with physical, mental, and emotional stresses better, because your breathing is literally influencing your nervous system on a moment by moment basis. In that, it's very difficult to say this next line without sounding like you're singing. Every breath you take, on the inhale, your heart rate speeds up, and on the exhale, your heart rate slows down. Your breathing works with your nervous system on a moment by moment basis, and hence why breathing is a reflection of the nervous system. If I'm very stressed and finding like I'm finding it difficult to cope, that will be reflected through my breathing. I'll be breathing. One of the most obvious ones is I'll be breathing faster. When I'm breathing faster, that has some downstream knock-on effects. It keeps me in more of a state of feeling of stress, like that fight or flight response. People will be fairly aware of, I'm sure, having experienced it. But then when my breathing is faster, it doesn't have as much time to have the same depth in terms of the mechanics. So it stays higher up in the chest. And when I'm wanting to breathe faster, because the body will always search for the path of least resistance, I'm much more likely to breathe through my mouth. And then that keeps me in this, let's say, vicious. It's more complicated than this, but on a sort of simple and hopefully logical basis, when I'm breathing faster, I'm much more likely to breathe into the upper chest, and I'm much more likely to take a path of least resistance, which the mouth provides, much less resistance than the two little holes in your face that most people call their nose.
So if it's not just a game of more volume, more oxygen, breathing through the mouth would be the best way if that was the case. Why is it that breathing through the nose is more ideal?
Well, now we're getting into some nuances. And before, let's come to like nose versus mouth secondary. The notion that you said then about like, okay, so if it's not just more is better, essentially, more air is going to be better, potentially, depending on the context of the thing you're doing. It's got to be dependent on your metabolic demands and how well are you actually oxygenating. If I'm breathing a smaller volume of air, but I'm not oxygenating my muscle tissues, not just my blood, but my muscle tissues, so we can measure both blood oxygen saturation with something like a pulse oximeter that goes in your finger, but we can also measure muscle oxygenation. There's some really good devices out there now. I've got one. They're a little bit pricey, but you can measure with near infrared spectrometry. You can measure and get a good gauge of like muscle oxygenation, which is a very, very different metric to your blood oxygenation. Your blood is the transport system for your oxygen, and so it's always very, very high, like typically over 95%. Whereas your muscle oxygenation fluctuates a lot depending on the exercise that you're doing, your fitness levels, how hard it is, and the duration and the next thing of the exercise that you're doing will dictate how much oxygen that muscle is demanding, and then like also how well it's able to use it, and then in recovery how well it can reoxygenate. If I'm breathing, let's say I'm breathing a liter of air and 20 breaths per minute. So I'm breathing with a liter with each breath. I'm breathing 20 breaths per minute. I'm breathing 20 liters of air in a minute. If that is sufficient for my oxygenation, breathing any more than that isn't going to deliver any more oxygen because your muscles don't need any more. So if I breathe more air, I breathe 30 liters per minute when I only need 20, I'm breathing 50% more than is required. And that's breathing, we forget, well, not forget, but often gets overlooked in that there's an energy cost to breathing. So my muscles, my diaphragm, my intercostals, the muscles that move my rib cage have to work to get the air to come in and out. And if I'm making them work harder than they need to, I'm wasting energy on the active breathing. The active breathing, depending on the exercise intensity, like sometimes in the literature we quote 15% of total energy consumption spent on the active breathing. The less efficient I am with breathing, the more energy I'm going to spend on breathing. That's energy and oxygen that's not going to your working muscles when we're talking about exercise context. If I'm more efficient with my breathing and I can extract more oxygen per breath, well, then I actually don't need to breathe as much air. Say I'm working really hard. Say me and you are both working really hard. We're having to ventilate, like we're getting close to our max. We're ventilating like 100 liters per minute. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But let's say I've trained my breathing and I've got more efficient at the way that I do it in how we can go into the detail later, but into how I'm actually ventilating, the rate that I'm doing it at, and where I'm sending that oxygen to, and how it's coming in. I'm in better control. My nervous system a little better regulated, but also I'm extracting more oxygen per breath. I might be able to get away with actually breathing, say, 85 liters of air and get the same oxygenation as you're getting with 100. So I then save a little bit. I'm likely to be more in control of my breathing. Whereas when you're not in control of your breathing, it's like your breathing's controlling you. It's a question I like ask athletes when I'm working with them. Are you in control of your breathing, or is your breathing controlling you? I want to be in control of my breathing. It has an effect on my mental state, my nervous system, but also if I'm in control of my breathing, the chances are that I've got the opportunity to ventilate a little more efficiently. So then I don't need to do it as much. So there's times when I do, breathing more air is going to be beneficial, but there's also times where breathing more air than you need to, well, that's going to be detrimental. You're almost wasting energy on the active breathing. And the opposite of that is that scenario. Say I can breathe 85 liters compared to your 100, and we're working just as hard as each other, but I'm being more efficient with mine. I'm going to save some energy on the active breathing that can go into either me feeling more comfortable, or it can go to whatever muscles are working, and I can push on. Does that make sense? That's quite theoretical, but in principle, that's how I would break it down when we're trying to talk about that. Sorry, and then you asked me about nose and mouth, but I'm sure you got some questions on that. We'll talk about nose and mouth in a second.
How would you train the ability to extract more oxygen? Because that's just something that happens, inside the body. I don't really feel like that's something I can control over. So how would I train that and improve that ability?
So the speed of your breathing and the mechanical aspect of your ventilation is going to play into that. So the ability for me to get oxygen, or to get air, which is about atmospheric air, 20.9% oxygen. Mm-hmm. The ability for me to get air into the lower portions of my lungs at a calmer rate is something that then we can see more oxygen gets extracted per breath, because you've got a greater amount of blood sat low down within the lungs, and also because of gravity. And then you've also got a greater density of alveoli down in the bottom portion of the lungs. And the alveoli, those little air sacs, that's the place where the actual diffusion takes place from your lungs to your blood. It doesn't happen in all of the pipe work. And so because a certain amount of air gets, when you take an inhale, a certain volume of air is in the pipe work, and that volume of air that's in the pipe work can't get into the blood. That's called like dead space within the lungs. That's around about 150 milliliters, obviously dependent on the size of the person, the size of their lungs. But there's it's not inconsequential. Like it's a reasonable amount of air for every breath that you take. So if I'm breathing a liter of air, actually more like 850 milliliters is what's getting to the alveoli rather than the full liter. Which means if I take lots and lots of breaths, I'm having more of that air staying in that dead space where the diffusion can't happen. Whereas if I can take a slightly more controlled, slower breath, that gives me two things. One, I waste less air in dead space. If I can proportionally increase the size of that breath. The time being a little slower, so the rate of breathing being a little slower, just relative to what like your auto is like, that time means that I've got a little bit of extra time, the slower breath, a little bit of extra time to actually breathe deeper. Because the distance from whether air's coming in through my mouth or through my nose, it's got to get to my windpipe. Yeah. From there, whether it's coming through my nose or mouth, the distance from there to my upper chest is only a few inches. But down to the lower portion of my lungs, which is even off screen here, like the bottom of where that diaphragm is going to pull air down into, that distance is going to take longer to happen. So I actually need a slightly slower breath in order to be able to find that efficient mechanical ventilation, which is starting from the lower rib cage, moving up and out on the inhale, and the diaphragm moving down and flattening out. If I can combine those things together, if I was testing you like in a VO2 max scenario where I can look at the amount of oxygen that's coming in your exhalation, I will see, rather than say atmospheric air being 20.9% oxygen, rather than there being like 17% oxygen in your exhalation, there might be 15 or 14, a lower amount of oxygen in your exhale because your body is actually extracting it at a better rate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So why?
That's quite complex for people typically to hear for the very first time sometimes. So if people are listening, you might want to go, you might have to go on a minute, just rethink. But it should make some like rational, logical sense of like, oh yeah, if my body's using oxygen at a better rate, then there's going to be less in my exhalation because you breathe out a lot of your oxygen.
Yeah.
You can't utilize it all. So you breathe 75% of it out.
So if slowing down that breath rate is important to extracting more oxygen, what is the ideal breath rate that we should be sitting at? Like,
so this is then context dependent. Okay. So far, I've probably got excited about talking about, we said like if I was doing a VO2 max test, I'm talking about during exercise when breathing is going to have to get bigger and larger. So if we're talking at like just at rest, so it's got our breathing rate needs to is going to be reflecting of like our level of like stress or level of calm. The more stressed I feel, the higher my heart rate, the higher my breathing rate is likely to be. If I'm not doing any exercise, if I'm literally sat down just worrying about all of the difficult things that are happening in all of our lives, then I'm breathing like potentially like I'm sort of exercising. Yeah, I'm not actually exercising. And your body doesn't need more air and more oxygen at that point. One of the problems is the volume of air that you breathe in dictates the volume of air that you breathe out. And when the volume of air you breathe out will dictate the amount of carbon dioxide that's leaving your lungs and leaving your body and blood. So what happens is if that faster breathing rate is leading to you breathing more air in and more air out, we end up like reducing our baseline levels of CO2, which then can make us more sensitive to CO2 because you don't have it, you're regularly getting rid of it, so it's not staying in the body. And that then plays into another part of the same vicious cycle of like staying in a little bit more of a stressed or anxious state, because a faster breathing rate will make us stay more sympathetic dominant, but also we have chemoreceptors not just in the brainstem for controlling our breathing that are sensitive to those levels of CO2. We also have the fear sensors in the brain in the amygdala. It has chemoreceptors for CO2. So what the research sort of shows us is if I'm more sensitive to carbon dioxide, not only am I going to be triggered to breathe faster, I can be, and I say can be potentially more prone to feelings of stress and anxiety from a physiological perspective, let alone, emotionally what's going on. So the physical and the mental and the emotional, that like they all actually merge in together when we look at our physiology and our psychology through the lens of breathing, because there are these links, which I then think becomes a really helpful tool for people, whether you're trying to manage your breathing as like a sports person to improve your like performance and recovery, or if I'm a human in the world that is under various different physical, mental, emotional stresses, I can build up my physiological resilience to some of those stresses using my breathing, using my breath control. And if I have a better tolerance and better relationship with carbon dioxide, it's going to be one element that can give me resilience to those feelings of stress and anxiety. I'm not saying it's the cure all for everything, but it gives you some physiological resilience.
Mouth tape, and
Straight in.
nasal strips. How do you feel about those?
So let's get nasal strips. I'm not a massive like I'll try anything to like see, because I want to experience it to be able to make an informed decision. And also, if some of my clients need some help or they're wanting to try something, I want to be able to like give a fair reflection of what that's like, because I've actually experienced it. So you can get these nasal dilators that go on the inside and like push out, and they will definitely open up the nostrils on the outside for sure. But they are only working on like this tip of the iceberg. Yeah. Like the airway, let me go, little prop. What's really interesting is what's going on back here. Your nasal dilator goes in here. Yeah. The bigger and wider my nostrils is going to help with my ability to ventilate air through my nose. Yeah. The width of my nostrils, and you'll see very big, wide, good nostrils, strong nostrils, and you'll see very thin, narrow noses with little holes that are breathing strongly, like want to close in on themselves. Like that's not helpful. So dilators that can go on the inside and open up, like, yeah, they can help for sure, but it's fairly intrusive, like sticking something in your nose, and it's not particularly comfortable, and can often feel slightly more annoying than helpful. The little strips that go on the outside, they can help to just pull apart a little bit, which can help feel a little bit more openness. You got all these people now, they've got some, I don't know what brand it is, but like, where it's basically like a magnet, and you like stick these things on there, it's like, boom, and I'm a bit like, we need to know what it is that we're trying to achieve. Okay, because there's an element where the resistance my nose is providing can actually be beneficial for the engagement of my diaphragm and drawing, when I'm mechanically ventilating, drawing that air into the lower portion of the lungs, it being driven in with a greater amount of pressure, which can actually help improve that diffusion from the alveoli into the blood. So the resistance that you feel with the nose isn't always bad. And actually, if I always seek taking away that resistance, what happens? You know, if I've got a gym with like, I've got the ability to I've got all my weights. If I add up all my weights, I can do like a 150 kilo deadlift. If every week you start taking those weights away and you start hiding them or you go sell them, and I'm left then with like 100 kilo, and then eventually 50 kilo, and then I'm just left with the bar, and I carry on deadlifting with the bar, what happens to my strength?
Goes down. You'll lose it.
You lose it. So like taking that resistance, or seeking to take that resistance away from my nose, if I've got, you know, if my nose is perfectly healthy in terms of it's not broken, I don't have a deviated septum, I should be seeking to build up my adaptations to being able to ventilate through it and getting my diaphragm to be comfortable with that resistance. That would be one point. The other thing that I'd say that is far more useful, because it has other beneficial effects that helps on not just that's not going to help on the little tip of the iceberg, is more on the airway, is training the tongue. When you train the tongue position and strength and tone of the tongue is connected to all the muscles that support your jaw, all the muscles of your airway and neck. When I train the tongue, I train my airway. And when people train their tongue with things like tongue suction exercises like or tongue push-ups where you're trying to push the tongue up, we can help to like release the tongue, but also strengthen the tongue, which helps strengthen the structural integrity of your airway. And then actually breathing without things on me is beneficial. Now, just to give a tiny bit of context, if I'm going to do, like I'm training for 100K Ultra Trail Snowdonia, which is like next month in May, and 6,500 meters of elevation over 100 kilometers on a brutal course. I'm going to be working pretty hard. I'll get so sweaty that those nasal strips won't stay on, but I'll try to use some the Breathe Right strips. There's the relatively small, gentle ones, because it gives me a little bit of openness, because I'm going to be working at, let's say, beyond my max, like, because the challenge is fairly aggressive. Yeah. Whereas in a lot of my training, I'm not using that little tool. Yeah. And there's other things that I use as well, that I like to use stuff that's not equipment, really, like as if it can just be your body. So for example, if I try and breathe really strongly in through my nose and I wrap my top lip over my top teeth, make a little, I call it turtle power, make a little turtle face. My wife criticizes me, says, it's not a turtle, it's a tortoise. But I don't know if she's actually right about that. But anyway, I'll argue with her later. But if I do that, make that sort of tortoise or turtle face with the lips, I create some tension over my nostrils. And then I've got a bit of a cold at the moment, so I'm a little bit snug. But if I breathe in strongly now, my nose feels more open. I've tested. Yeah, there you go. Look at your nostrils. People able to watch it rather than just listen. Like you feel that you see those nostrils open up. And I have experimented with this during some VO2 max testing, and I can see the difference in the volume of air that you can ventilate just by doing that through your nose compared to not doing that. And it's in the region of 25% more air that you can ventilate like that. Wow. Now, remember, we sort of said before, like, it's not always about ventilating more air. But when you're starting to ramp up during a VO2 max, like there's a point where you need to ventilate more air because you're going to be under oxygenating otherwise. Yeah, and little things like that are going to make a big difference. You could test out those various different strips as well, but I don't want to become reliant on some gizmo or gadget. Ideally,
absolutely, that makes sense. I've been using them for like sleeping, because I've been doing my mouth tape at night, and then just like to get a little bit more oxygen. It's been a newer addition, so I haven't really had the full effect to see if it's been more beneficial towards my sleep or my HRV. So I'm giving it some more time there. But
I would say, sorry, just like you will get more benefit out of doing some of the tongue exercises, because the tongue will not only train that nose openness, but it will also train the muscles of your airway, which all of the muscles in your body relax when you're asleep. All of the muscles, not all of your muscles apart from the muscles of the airway, all of them. So your airway muscles, right? If the muscle tone in your airway is lacking in terms of its tone, when they're relaxed and air's coming through a little faster, like the chance of them collapsing is much higher. So when you train the tongue, you train your airway. Like that's been when you asked about mouth tape, and actually you asked about speed of breathing at rest, which we'll come back to in a second. I was mouth taping for years, always with the belief of, well, at some point, my mouth is going to stay closed on its own if I've genuinely trained the autonomic nature of my breathing. And anytime I didn't tape, so I'd a few years in, I'm like, well, I'm not going to tape my mouth now because I feel like I've made those changes. And then I'd get woken up in the middle of the night because my wife, boom, is elbowing me saying, it's a tortoise, not a turtle. No, she's elbowing me saying, you're snoring. And I'd be like, what, me? And she's like, well, yeah, there's no one else in the bed, and it's not me, so it's definitely you that's snoring. So I would be snoring with my mouth open. Yeah. Now, one of the I like to lie on my back when I'm sleeping, and gravity will naturally pull the jaw open. That's one element. But the thing that made the difference for me was actually training the tongue suction and the tongue push-ups, training the tongue, training the airway, and then the mouth being happy to stay closed and the airway having enough tone and integrity, even when relaxed during sleep. So now I don't mouth tape at night because the mouth stays closed, and that's where I wanted myself to get to. It made sense to me that I don't want to have to tape my mouth all the time. Otherwise, I haven't actually really changed my auto. And at night when you're asleep, you're on auto, right?
Mm-hmm. For these tongue exercises, how many reps, how many sets, how many times a day or week are you doing these?
Whatever you want.
Yeah.
In that, like, do something. Like a very, very simple one that people can do is you try and suction the tongue to the roof of the mouth, and you open the mouth as wide as you can. And you're going to feel, so yours just came off. Boom. Yeah. So, but we'll come to that.
Yeah.
You, as you open it, you feel it stretching underneath. People just listening to the podcast need to find a video somewhere to watch. This is a visual one, but you're stretching the underneath, but at the same time, as well as lengthening and getting that stretch to the bottom portion of the tongue, you're strengthening the ability for it to stay up in the roof of the mouth where it lives. Yeah, when you're nasal breathing, your tongue should be to the roof of the mouth. That space, it's no coincidence. The shape and space of the roof of your mouth in between where all those teeth are, it's the shape of a tongue, because that's where your tongue's supposed to live. Now, sometimes people find it's very normal for people to find it very difficult to initially, but this helps almost immediately to actually create that suction. And then you say, you say, suction the tongue to the roof of the mouth like this, and you show them. And then what they do is they just put the tip of the tongue up and go, is this it? And you can see the difference between this and the difference between the, you
Absolutely.
see the stringy thing in the middle with the suction, and you see the whole of the tongue up. Now, you did a good example of, if you're struggling to do it, you try and make a few clicking noises with your tongue. Just do a couple of those now. Yeah, good. And then just notice, just before it pings off, that's the suction. Yeah, there, good. And then once you've got it suctioned, you try and open it wide, but you got to work hard to keep it there. Go on, you do one for us, yeah? Good. So look, the amount that you can open your mouth with that suction is being limited by the tightness of your tongue, and its ability to stay up is being limited by because look, if you open your mouth wide without it there, easy. A good little mark of people. Can you fit 3 fingers in sideways? It should be comfortably able to do that. There we go. Yeah, look, see, you put all sorts of things in that gob, yeah. But look, it's really important. It's funny, but it's really important. The position of your jaw will affect the space in your airway.
Yeah.
If the jaw is back, the jaw is literally in that airway. And if the jaw is back, if you pull your jaw back, pull it back, and then keep it back, and try and open your mouth as wide as you can with it back, you can't open it very far. But there's a lot of people, you say, open your mouth as wide as you can. They go, and they can't open it wide because the jaw is stuck back. And it's limiting their airway. So definitely, like yours is a good example. You can do the suction. You can start opening a bit. You want to train yourself to be able to like stretch that thing and keep some good suction on it. So strengthen the tongue's ability to stay up there. And when you do that, tongue gets a little bit more, you get some length through it. So it's easier to be up there. You're increasing the tone of the strength and tone of those muscles. And when you train the tongue, when you train the tongue, you train the airway. Your tongue is connected to goes all the way down to your big toe, but connected all the way through. But definitely connected to the throat and the airway muscles.
If somebody listening to this says, okay, I'm going to start training that, they do 5 minutes a day, when can they start to expect some kind of change?
Immediately.
Immediately.
Yeah. Your tongue will feel tired immediately. You'll be like, try and do some 10-second isometrics. You do a few of those, you'll be like, oh gosh, my tongue feels tired. Your tongue might feel tired now already, or you feel the stretch already.
It actually does.
Yeah, for sure. Look, you do some of the push-ups where you're pushing the tongue up to the roof of the mouth, trying to create a little bit of that sort of sensation of expansion. You then breathe through your nose with your tongue in that roof of that mouth. People will be like, My tongue, the air coming in feels freer. It's immediate, but it's not like immediate bang. Right, I've done it once. I don't need to ever do it again. Like anything, you just want to train it and you want to improve it. So just a little bit over time, and it's not a. My background is a strength and conditioning coach, where you do like we're doing 5 sets of 5 on back squat for this reason and blah 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 blah. Like for something like this, I don't program it as a. I'll give you an idea of like try some 10-second isometrics, but it's like just try some, do some.
Yeah.
Like you don't do any at the moment, do a bit of something, and if you notice a difference and you feel its benefits, you're going to want to do it a bit more regularly.
Okay, cool. I'll start implementing that because I also sleep on my back, and so if my wife will also elbow me awake at night if I'm snoring, so that's been my implementation of the mouth tape, trying to mitigate that and trying to get a little bit deeper sleep. So, but ideally, I can get off of that because I'm not one of those people who's set on using it just for the sake of using it. I'd rather fix the issue and be able to breathe on my own.
That's why I felt like I wasn't actually getting to the root cause of the issue. Now, your benefit with the mouth tape, so long as it stays on and it's not stressful for you, like will be good during that period. Like keep the mouth tape on at night whilst you're. And actually, for the last couple of nights, I've been plenty of colds and things going around at the moment. So like I'm a bit congested in my nose. And so I taped the last 2 nights just to ensure that, like, knowing that I was just a bit more congested and bunged up because of a bit of a cold, that my body wasn't going to just go for the path of least resistance, which was the mouth. But typically, it would be something that I don't need to utilize anymore as a sign of changing, like I say, getting to the root cause and actually like changing the auto.
Do you use specific nasal breathing when it comes to higher rate of exercise? So runners, CrossFitters, whatever, rugby players, whatever that is, do you have them train specifically for nasal breathing?
Depending on the person, depending on the context of their sport, but there's always elements where we can utilize the benefits of nasal breathing that will help protect the airway, but it can help with the oxygenation. We can always find simple areas where they can do, like as warm-ups, cool-downs, as a really easy example. Like the intensity of your warm-up and your cool-down should be okay nasally. The other thing that we can do is we can improve someone's threshold at which they can nasal breathe. We can measure it during testing, and then we can train it and improve someone's threshold. So let's say I can work at like 80% of my VO2 max nasally, but above that, I'm not oxygenating enough. I can measure the muscle oxygenation. It's like I need to mouth breathe, and I do that. We can see that point improve with training. Yeah, as you practice nasal breathing at gradually higher intensities. What you want to make sure is that you're able to ventilate well enough, and the diaphragm isn't just, you're not just going to breathe fast upper chest shallow, but have your mouth closed. Like you want to be ensured that you're mechanically ventilating well, like we discussed earlier. Don't assume that you're just closing your mouth and breathing through your nose cures all of your compensatory mechanical ventilation issues. Yeah, that's a misconception that a lot of people are. It's been overly simplified. So someone's like, all right, cool, take my mouth and then all of my problems are solved. Like I don't get anyone to tape their mouth during exercise, for example, because 1, you might want to have a drink. 2, you should just choose to have your mouth closed. 3, there's sometimes benefits to mouth breathing depending on the exercise intensity of thing that you're doing. And 4, a lot of the athletes that I work with play sports like rugby, where they also need to be able to communicate. So I don't ask anyone to tape their mouth at night. I don't, not a mouth. Some people use mouth tape, but tape during exercise. If you want to practice some nasal breathing, just close your mouth during exercise. That's a very nice, safe, and easy way to exercise. But people like doing like relatively extreme things these days, don't they? It's like, I just want to make it more extreme. It's like do it for the right reason, not just to try and be more extreme. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, David, what is something that you think is very important when it comes to mouth breathing that we didn't talk about yet that you think we should?
One thing that's linked to the mouth breathing with the just finishing off that piece about nasal breathing.
Mm-hmm.
If I choose to train nasally at gradually higher intensities and create some adaptations, the extra resistance that provides helps to train the diaphragm, and in terms of like it's got to overcome more resistance than when the mouth is open, and it starts to help me with my breath control. In that, if you're going to be breathing through your nose, air just can't come in as quick because there's more resistance, and therefore you have to breathe at a slightly slower rate. And when you combine that with good mechanical ventilation, you're starting to ingrain good movement patterns from a breathing perspective with good control. As air's not coming in as quickly, it's not going out as quickly. So that CO2 we talked about before, that's a real prime driver of our breathing. It's a primary driver of our breathing. It isn't leaving the body as quickly. So it's a great way to build up some of your tolerance to CO2, some of your ability to control your breathing, as well as like mechanically ventilating well. And what we've seen in the research is, and I've seen this with athletes that I've worked with, and it's seen it in my own training, that if you do some of your work to get better at nasal breathing, you also get better at mouth breathing. And we can see that in terms of those efficiencies, how much oxygen extracting per breath, we can see those efficiencies carry over into your mouth breathing because you'll be ventilating in a more effective, efficient way. Whereas if you just train mouth breathing, it doesn't make you any better at nasal breathing. And when you're mouth breathing as an auto-compensatory, you're more likely to ventilate mechanically more into the upper chest and less efficient, like we said. So there's a benefit to nasal breathing for even when you're going to mouth breathe, because there's plenty of sports and people within sports where they are, if they're a professional athlete, depending on the context and the type of their sport, they're going to have to work at an intensity that is beyond their threshold to oxygenate efficiently through their nose. But that said, it's much higher than people think. A bit of an average ballpark figure that's been quoted in more recent literature is about 80 to 85% of people's VO2 max they can do through their nose. But most people don't think they can, so they don't even try to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and how much training, if I'm a non-elite professional athlete, I'm not elite, I'm not professional, how much of my training is done above 85% of my VO2 max? Like that is, it's a good intensity. That for some people, none.
Yeah.
There's one thing's for sure, there's no health benefits to mouth breathing during exercise. I think that's something that's very beneficial to say to people. So I'll say again, there are no benefits health-wise to mouth breathing during exercise. And even stronger than that, there is some literature coming out now showing that it's not that there's no benefit, it can be detrimental to your health, particularly your heart, because of the stress and strain that faster breathing rates that mouth breathing allows for, increase in sympathetic stress with the faster breathing rates that put more stress and strain on the heart. That's relatively new literature, that's sort of theories around it, but we are seeing incidences of like heart conditions with endurance athletes that we think could have a healthy heart because they're so fit and healthy, but we're seeing a lot of issues there. And yeah, one theory being linked to the amount of fast breathing that increases sympathetic activity and stress in the heart that mouth breathing provides, whereas your nose is going to provide a slowing and reduction of that sympathetic load. So wrapping all of that up for someone that's doing exercise for health, which is a lot of people. Most people aren't professional athletes, right? So most people are exercising for enjoyment and for health, and they enjoy it and they like it, but they want to be healthy. If you're doing exercise for health, there's no benefit for you to do that through your mouth, which will be fairly there might be some resistance to hearing that because you're like, oh, well, I like doing X, Y, and Z, and I couldn't possibly do that through my nose. But maybe you've never trained your tongue and you never trained your airway. Maybe no one's ever shown you how to ventilate efficiently. Maybe you've never practiced it. And something I've always done when I do workshops with, like in a gym for members of a gym, where none of them there are professional athletes, but they like going after it. They like going hard. Like, we'll do a little test of their threshold at the start. We'll then do a workshop and teach them all this stuff. It's all really simple, easy stuff. Some of the stuff we've talked about and some of the stuff we've shown with the tongue, etc. And then put them back into that test of what's their nasal threshold. And everyone does more than they did at the beginning. And you ask, put your hand up if you did more. Everyone puts on it. And you say, put your hand up if it was also more than you thought you'd be able to do. And it's like, yep. I didn't think, because the starting point is we just have this misconception that we couldn't possibly breathe through the nose effectively.
So would a strategy for me to implement this, let's say I've been getting into running more. Let's say I get right before I go out to start my run, I spend 5 minutes warming up my tongue, doing those suction exercises, doing those push-ups. Would that prime me to better nasally breathe directly into that run?
That might tire your tongue out for the run.
Yeah. Okay.
No, serious. So it's more like, maybe, but it's more like that's like baseline work you're doing away from your training. And you're practicing breathing calmly, which would be quiet, and breathing nasally with your tongue up. And rather than breathing, one classic one for people is if you breathe up your nose, so breathe up your nose, you feel that like lifting of your chest. Everything you breathe up your nose, everything goes vertically. And I already showed you this thing. Air goes backwards. It doesn't go up the nose anyway.
Yeah.
When we put the tongue in the roof of the mouth and we breathe backwards, almost like into the face rather than up the nose, rather than the chest lifting and being activated, you'll feel it coming more from lower down, from the diaphragm, and being more of an expansion. So I breathe in horizontally rather than vertically, and I get that expansion from the rib cage. When the tongue's in the right position to the roof of the mouth, that helps with the connection to the diaphragm. You're more, it's not going to solve everyone's mechanical ventilation problems, but it's a great starting point to tongue up and breathe backwards rather than up your nose. That can be really helpful for people when they're trying to. And with exercise, you just need to find an intensity that you can manage nasally to start with. That's always the starting point. And don't worry if it's slower than you want to go. Just choose to do a little bit of work on your breathing, and it will increase and improve as you start to adapt and get used to it.
Okay. I'm going to start implementing some more strict nasal breathing on the start of my runs, and I'm interested to see how that progresses versus both in time and in intensity that I can maintain that. And I'll get back to you after a couple months
good.
and let you know. Well, David, I appreciate you taking the time to come out here and chat with me. I find this topic extremely fascinating, and I know it's important to breathe. I know obviously just to stay alive, but the ability to improve it has been something that I've been learning more about, and the benefits there with sleep, with your day-to-day life, with how you perceive the world and the environment around you. It's very important.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Well, I have a question I asked David, all my guests. If there was somebody, who would be the person that you would be most interested in either speaking to or listening somebody else speak to who's alive and well? And I'll do my best to get him on the podcast. And if I do, I'll of course credit you with giving me the insight to get him on here. But who would that person be for you?
So as in someone who would be a good guest for you to speak to?
Somebody that you would just be interested in hearing them speak. Who would that person be for you? It doesn't necessarily have to be a specific guest. I'm just interested in who that person is for you.
Gosh, there's loads.
Yeah.
There's someone you won't be able to. Can I give you one that you won't be able to get him on the podcast? But then there's another one I can give you his phone number and you can get him on the podcast.
Give me both.
Oh, there's a couple. So I'll give you three. So the person you're not going to be able to get, David Rudisha.
Okay.
800-meter world record holder. Does literally almost the entirety of that thing breathing through his nose.
Really?
He comes from a very interesting tribe but there's no like interviews of him talking about his actual breathing. But you watch the Rio Olympics 2016, watch the London Olympics 2012. Everyone behind him starts panting, and he's just like, and the difference in form, as soon as they blow that gasket, like they just lose their form, they start rocking side to side, and the more they start mouth breathing, and the more the further he gets away from them. But there's, how on earth you would make contact with him, I have no idea. But there's no interview. There's nowhere him or his coach or anyone. So you can search on the internet, and like I have done, you just can't find anything. But you can watch races and see him with his mouth closed, just smoking everybody. Like, it's amazing. Now he's got a flipping incredible nose.
Does he?
His airway is far bigger than me. He will be able to ventilate much more air than me. Yeah, his threshold for nasal breathing is basically max. Like, he's just a great example of someone that is anatomically able to ventilate a lot of air, and he's also obviously like his world record holder for the 800 meters. Like, he's incredibly talented and conditioned and done a lot of work, but he's able to do that work nasally, which is a bit eye-watering when you first see it. You're like, get out of town, that guy. How has he got his mouth closed? Two people you could get on. Shane Benzie is a running coach, movement coach. Okay. He's a good friend of mine now. I've done some work with him. He's a great guy. Looks at not just running, but just movement through a very interesting lens. And then another one who would be great to speak to is Chris Bodman, who is a sports psychologist. Fascinating thinker. He's like a mystic. He's like, he says he can read your mind. The guy's a genius.
Spoke with Chris.
You have?
Yeah, I've had him on. He's awesome. Yeah, he is a genius. He literally
knows me better than I know myself. I'm like, this is freaking me out, but I like it. Yeah, we're going to do a workshop together down in London.
Are you?
At the end of June, I think. Yeah, at the end of June.
That would be awesome, because he's a very intelligent individual.
Oh yeah, man, for sure.
Okay, well, I'll try reaching out to the other one. I'm very interested.
Shane Benzie.
Shane Benzie. Okay, I'll reach out to him. Well, again, David, thank you for your time, and I can't wait to implement some of these that we've been talking about. I'm really going to start with the suction drills. Before we sign off, where can people find you? Where can they get more of you?
Yeah, so my website is probreathwork.com. There's a free foundations course available on there. There's also a free course for stress and anxiety. It's available as the Pro Breathwork app on Apple and Android too. But all the details are at probreathwork.com. On socials, you'll find me mostly on Instagram, which is jacko.david.jackson.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir.
Pleasure, mate.
Thank you for listening to the Chase Merrill podcast.